Send this video to someone who disagrees. I'd love to prove them wrong with undeniable evidence. This video is not for people who already know this. You guys are smart. Send it to someone who disagrees and has the time for this. You can watch it if you want, if you just want to be entertained by bad counter arguments. I made the video out of a strong spite. Kidding. That was a joke. I'm not kidding. Hello, internet. I'm Gollyfix, but you can call me Golly, or Fix, or Gollyfix, or we can not do that whole bit because it's cringe, whatever. Welcome to Undertale for Idiots, a series that probably won't even get more than one episode where I explain parts of the game that a handful of people these days are blinded from because of labels, such as the example used in the title of this video. I'm never saying the name of this series again. I have an irrational fear of saying names. I hope you don't mind if I just say other things instead of character names. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, let me remind you of the whole tall skeleton loves eating spaghetti thing, or the fallen human is obsessed with chocolate thing back when labels on this game were more common. But those are bad examples. Why would you be so obsessed with cooking one type of food but never eat it? And they totally like chocolate that much. Look at that red text. A good example is more like the gacha community once somehow completely agreeing that the crying child from 5 Nights at Freddy's feels the same way about cookies. I don't know where that idea even came from, but we're off topic now. Now I'm sure the dumbest of you in the crowd are going, huh? Labels? But he doesn't feel emotions. He does, and I can prove it to you. Just shut up. Sit the hell down. Listen closely. As a fan and super enthusiast of the character, it makes me very angry when people describe him as being emotionless rather than being loveless or lacking compassion, because it's mostly based on misinformation, labels, and assumption. In fact, I made this channel just so I had somewhere to put this video essay, which I wrote the script for in the middle of the night. I've been mad about this kind of thing for a while, but I never got the idea to make this video until now, and I'll tell you why. Me and my unnamed friend were aggressively, that's not even a word. Non-aggressively isn't a word. I mean, not like non-aggressively is a word, but that's at least understandable. Not aggressively arguing about the character having emotions. Of course, you can probably guess which side I was on. I gotta stop with these headphones. They're getting in the way. They're making it hard. They're making what hard? They're making what hard? I argued pretty poorly there. He said I was bringing up way too many fan ideas instead of sticking only to canonically confirmed information, and he is absolutely right. But I have been proved for this. The argument he had against it that stood out to me was the fact that most other people believe the character to be emotionless, or label him as such. The way he argued reflected a possibility he was making every argument up on the spot just because he believed everybody else was right, just because it was the majority belief, or so he said it was. We didn't actually have data to prove or disprove that, so I ran a poll on my VA channel. It went from 9 votes to 13 to 20, 24, 27, and 90% of those 27 agreed with me. I used Google's calculator and it says that equals to 25.11 people. Wait, does that imply that one of them is 1.11 person or one is 0.11 people? Whatever. That means at least one person and at most 2 people in the poll disagreed. But although most people would agree with me, there are still a small amount of people who don't. Heck, it's bad enough to the point I can't convince an AI bot of the character himself that... I mean, I can't convince my friend that the character feels emotion. I wasn't doing any talking to AI to study his emotional state and pretending that it's really him rather than focusing primarily on the game and its contents to provide evidence. That's false evidence. That isn't fair. I would never. So anyway, as you can see here, he says, by the way, unnamed friend, if you're watching, I love you, buddy. I agree with and relate to you on many levels and you're one of the best. And might I say, your profile picture adds a bit of charisma to the mix. So even though we came to a happy agreed disagreement, it just hasn't sat right with me since. He reminded me of the fact a lot of people think the character is emotionless, and it's been keeping me up at night, giving me the urge to make my first video essay, if that's the right term for this, against labeling. Labeling? How do you spell that? For this video, I will be focusing primarily on this example. I'll be focusing primarily on this example for the first half, talking about my friend's bad arguments for it, and then going over the reason why these misconceptions are made. So let's start simple and explain our character situation. In the kill everybody pew pew route of the game, this character states his compassion had disappeared when he turned into a flower. This is because he lacks his monster soul. So what does this mean for him exactly? Compassion is an emotion described as sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. It's important to note that missing one emotion is not the same thing as being emotionless. If someone was missing one arm, what would you say? You wouldn't say they're armless. Well, I sure hope you wouldn't say that. You'd say they have one arm, or that one of their arms is missing. With people who believe that out of the way, it's time for the more complicated part. convincing people who genuinely think he feels no emotions at all. Please understand that although not all counter-arguments can be argued against, it doesn't mean he doesn't feel emotions. Just because you prove he doesn't feel one thing once doesn't mean he doesn't feel it under other conditions. Alright, of course, we'll begin with this tutorial. Although I read a funny comment on some video where this friendliness pellet shot looked like he was trying not to laugh, we're gonna skip that part because it isn't really set in stone that that's what the expression is conveying. We're skipping straight to the part where he dodges bullets. The 2 times you do that, he shows or tries hard not to show angry feelings. Anger being an emotion. So right away, what's the issue? You could say that the first time he just finds it kind of funny, but that's an emotion too, so I don't know why you'd argue with that. That wouldn't help you at all. Like, the second time though, it's as clear as day that he is pretty angry.
Is this a joke? Are you brain dead? Run into the bullets!
Okay, so a counter-argument I got for most of his dialogue, mostly counting against this part, is that he's acting. My argument against that is that he can't be pretending to be angry here. 1, it's completely unnecessary, and 2, if he was pretending to be angry, he wouldn't slip up and say bullets. He's acting to trick you, not to scare you away. What if I were trying to trick you into inviting me over to your house just so I could kill you in your sleep, and then say, I am going to kill you in your sleep? Would that help? Alright, to be fair, you'd probably assume it was a joke, but still, it's important to understand he isn't always acting. Next, he shows the feeling of surprise when he's hit by a fireball by our dear, sweet, beautiful, amazing, fluffy, soon-to-be goat mother. Again, he wouldn't be able to pretend here because, unlike usual, he can't predict that sequence, as it's related to a being he has never met. I'm going to kill. The only reason the goat came to save you is because the flower was attacking you. If you never fell, she'd never come to save you. Therefore, he's never experienced this situation. I hate chickens. Therefore, he's never experienced this situation and is showing genuine surprise. Backup evidence I have for him not planning all this out is the interest he shows just after you leave the ruins and just before you enter Snowden. He says,
This is so much more interesting.
Heavily implying, no, directly saying that he didn't plan this. Then there's major moments, like him getting really confused after neutral to the point of crying and leaving. Of course, if you believe in the theory where he faked his whole battle sequence, this can be argued against. You can argue against many of the other points because he's just complicated. You can argue with his worry in this dialogue, with the clarity not yet wearing off, though I don't believe that one. You can argue with his crying at the end of the pew pew kill everybody being a guilt trip trick to convince his best friend to keep him alive. I don't agree with that one either. What you can't argue with is his pew pew kill everybody dialogue in New Home. He may have stated, I didn't feel anything at all, but come on, we all know he was referring specifically to caring about the situation. I hate them. The evidence here is solid. He's very excited to be with his friend again, he's showing happiness, and eventually shows extreme fear of betrayal. He's very excited to be with his friend again. He's showing happiness and eventually shows extreme fear. You know, I'm not doing it again. Let's just leave in the hecking chicken noise. I was waiting for that. Although you can say it's special because he's with character name. That's not the same as saying he just transformed. By then, he's still just him. And that him, despite what the circumstances may be or how rare it is, can still feel happy and scared. But one question for you, my dear viewer. Is he truly unable to feel compassion? Because in the alarm clock dialogue, he seemed to care enough about his mother to get her to bed and give her a glass of water filled to the very top. But that's a question for another day and another person. Because how the hell would I make a whole video out of that? Have someone like Mystic Slime make a YouTube short about it or something.
Popular Undertale rumor is that Toby Fox once said Frisk is just a blank slate who is entirely up to the player's interpretation. Completely made up. And yet it's insanely widespread.
Wait, completely made up? Insanely widespread? Guys, I may not have a brain, but I have a theory. Mystic Slime is a time traveler from the future who has seen my video already and went to the past to tell himself to make a video about a widespread misconception before I do. All the evidence is there. So, segment 2, more on my friend's view. My friend came up with the worst arguments for his claims. Again, no offense, I still love you, heart emoji, but they were pretty bad. He called the tears on the sprite eye bags and said that trait is up for interpretation.
Key character traits aren't up for interpretation.
I brung up that the character said he cried, and instead of saying, still got that assy in him, he said he cried as in yelling. I looked back in the dialogue just earlier, and it turns out that's definitely crying tears, and the crying for help part came in dialogue somewhere before that. He also eventually settled for tricking himself into feeling emotions, but you can't trick yourself into being so scared that you actually shake and beg for your life. That argument may have been meant for the emotion of joy specifically, but I still don't agree with it. If we're talking about violent, ecstatic, evil joy, Anyway, there's definitely substance. A little bit. Another one of the arguments was that he's soulless, therefore cannot feel emotions. Well, my words for that are, clearly that isn't how it works then. If all of this evidence exists and he continues to show emotion, then clearly within the game's universe, where things don't make sense anyway, being soulless doesn't mean you can't feel emotions. My friend seemed like he was arguing just because he'd be disappointed if the character wasn't emotionless, as he also said it's better for his character that way. So if he's watching right now, I can explain to him that that isn't the case. And him not being emotionless actually makes it easier to understand him, write his character, and explain the way he acts. If you were emotionless, compassionless, and loveless, how do you think you'd be like? If you say evil, murderous, and interested in becoming a god, you'd be wrong. If you didn't feel anything, you wouldn't feel the need or even wish to do those things. You'd have no reason to, because either way it wouldn't make a difference to your sad, meaningless existence. He wouldn't just not care about people, but he wouldn't care. He wouldn't try to take your soul. He wouldn't be childish or exaggeratingly violent, because without emotions, how can you even have that personality? He said the only thing that gave him the will to come back from death was determination. Determination to live because he was scared of dying.
No, I don't want to die. I don't really want to yell that out in a scared way, because I don't feel like it right now.
If that worry hadn't gotten in the way, he would have just let himself die. Actually, I was surprised to see this comment on the poll after I had already written this portion. Is that how you pronounce that? Paul? Is it Pole? The emotionless character you imagine isn't how being emotionless works. I believe the traits you're looking for are more specific. Traits gained with his experience. He drove himself insane. He can predict everything, so no one and nothing matters to him. He can't love. He may be a psychopath. He may be a sociopath. He may be responsible for several war crimes. But he isn't emotionless. So, final segment, why do people mischaracterize what's right in front of them? Well, I probably wouldn't have as good an explanation for that as someone who's experienced doing videos like these, but I'll try for you guys. You did make me feel highly agreed with, after all. Years ago, it seemed as if everyone thought that skeleton guy that everyone loves would torture you just for killing his brother, or that he'd get mad just over ketchup. It's just one of those games where a lot of people take any interesting or even non-interesting information and take it either way too seriously or take it as a lot more than it is. Even I had my hot minute of labeling. When people are given something that really matters to the story of a game like this, they tend to take the bigger idea and make assumptions. Likely either because they think it works well or because they think it's funny. Explaining why people can see a character like him say, "I didn't feel anything at all," and then completely forget everything else about him. Fans also take things too seriously in another way, with smaller moments that are more obviously for the game's humor rather than anything to take note of. Such as the tall skeleton guy commenting on you using a floating heart to caress his biceps. While it may be possible that the monsters do see that heart, that probably wasn't the kind of thing we were meant to observe or take away from the experience. Nowadays, however, the fan base has gotten noticeably better at seeing the characters for what they truly are. Man, was I alive for the perfect generation or what? Yeah, you're right, the answer is probably what. Does anyone else, absolutely hate when TV shows have an or what question and one of the characters replies with or what instead of just what? That's like if I asked you which movie you preferred, Sonic 3 or Mufasa, and then you responded or Mufasa. And at the same time, it's as ridiculous as you responding with anything that contains the name Mufasa. Anyways, at the end of all this, I just want to say I'm glad the fan base is getting better at characterization for everyone, and seeing my favorite done right brings a smile to my face. Sometimes. And that's why I believe Undertale is actually a metaphor for grilled steak being better when you cut the fat off of it, because the fat tastes bad and you're better off giving it to the dog. But hey, that's not a theory, just a fact. Bye.